The scanner doesn't present treatment. The laser doesn't actually help retain patients. The phone system doesn't convert those calls into appointments. People do. I remember walking into an office and it probably wasn't even 8:30 in the morning. And three team members were already kind of pointing fingers at each other. Nobody was taking ownership. It kind of felt like it was a blame game. I knew that the issue wasn't scheduling, it was culture. I've seen practice after practice spend money on technology, a new piece of equipment, and they see little to no return because the team wasn't trained to really maximize that or to leverage it. The biggest competitive advantage is not technology, it's not equipment, it's not marketing, it's not your location, it's people.
Welcome back to the Private Practice Playbook. Today we're tackling a topic that every practice owner talks about, and almost all of them are struggling with too. While Jay is usually behind the microphone, today we're going inside the practice with someone who has spent her career helping doctors, teams, and patients succeed from the clinical side of the business. Our guest is Jaclyn Dunn, registered dental hygienist and clinical team lead at the Practice Growth Institute. Over the course of her career, Jaclyn has worked inside more than 850 private practices across the country, helping teams improve patient care, strengthen clinical systems, and create better experiences for both patients and providers. So when practices hit growth ceilings, the instinct is often to look for the next piece of technology, the next big equipment purchase, or the next operational upgrade. But what if the biggest opportunity sitting inside your practice isn't another machine? What if it's your people? Today, we're going to talk about hiring, retention, accountability, culture, and why your team may be the single greatest investment you can make for long-term growth. So let's dive in. Jaclyn, so good to see you. Thanks for talking with us today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Happy to be here.
So, Jaclyn, when you walk into a practice for the first time, what tells you within the first hour whether it's healthy or struggling?
Oh gosh. I think, one thing that I've learned after visiting so many offices is that culture reveals itself pretty quickly. So I remember walking into an office and it probably wasn't even 8:30 in the morning. And three team members were already kind of pointing fingers at each other, talking about some kind of scheduling snafu. Nobody was taking ownership. It kind of felt like it was a blame game. So before we even started training, I knew that the issue wasn't scheduling, it was culture. So a lot of times within the first hour, I'm not looking at anything except for people, looking to see how does the team communicate? Do they greet each other? Are they proactive? Does the doctor, how does the doctor interact with the team? Do people seem like energized and happy to be there or exhausted? Does the team seem confident in making decisions? It's really just looking at the dynamic and what's happening with the people versus anything else.
Yeah, that's the word that came to my mind too, dynamic, right? Because even though, patients go to their dentist or their private practice for the highest quality of care, the latest technology, it still is a living, breathing business and it's people serving people. So pointing that out is really next level. And I think that a lot of practice owners might not consider. Having said that, practice owners do spend a ton of money on equipment upgrades. But why do you think specifically that their bigger investment should be their people, not so much the technology?
Well, the people are what's going to get the return, right? So I've seen, practice after practice spend money on, technology, a new piece of equipment, and they see sometimes, little to no return because the team wasn't trained to really maximize that or to leverage it. So, often, I see owner doctors go, oh, equipment, technology, that's going to get me, that's going to get us the production, that's going to get us the treatment, that's going to help, grow the practice. But the scanner doesn't present treatment, the laser doesn't actually retain patients, the phone system doesn't convert, calls into appointments. People do. So, equipment, technology, those are great things. We should absolutely invest in those, but the more important thing and the better investment is, building the team and training them so that they're capable of leveraging it. So, making sure that we're investing in leadership and, communication and establishing accountability and, the ongoing development of all of the clinical team members and the admin team members. Sometimes the go-to feels like the equipment, and oftentimes that's the easier thing to go to. It feels easier and like faster ROI than doing that kind of hard work of developing the people.
Yeah, that's such an important distinction that the technology doesn't really work unless the people are working the right way. People
Yeah.
work for the technology, not vice versa. Like we mentioned earlier, you've been in upwards of 850 practices across the country and the world even. Is there like one common denominator that separates great teams from average or middle of the pack medium teams?
Yeah, I think the thing that stands out in my mind is that kind of the average teams, they're focused on the day-to-day like activities, like, oh wow, like we saw so many patients, we were so busy. Whereas, some of those really great teams, they're focused on the result. They're focused on the outcomes. What did we accomplish? It's a mindset shift that makes such a huge difference. I think also too with those really high performing teams, people know, everyone knows what success looks like. They know their role. They know what their role is. They know what they own, the stats that they're in charge of, the metrics that they're tracking, what they're accountable for. So, those great teams, they aren't staying in one place. They're not static. They're always getting better. They have that mindset of continual improvement. They're always asking that question like, what can we do today that would be better than what we did yesterday? So I think that's definitely something that I see that's an easy distinction between some of those kind of average teams and those really great teams.
Yeah, I'm hearing you say like those teams have a lot of clarity in what they're doing in the practice, their role in the practice. Where's the cohesion with the team? How are they working together? That's so interesting.
Definitely.
Yeah. What is perhaps the biggest hiring mistake that you see practice owners making today? And any tips on how they can avoid those mistakes?
Gosh, this one is a good one. I think maybe two biggest mistakes. So I think one of the biggest mistakes is hiring based on a resume. So really looking for that experience, that, really beefy resume. And, our most successful practices, they hire based more on potential. So I've seen, some of the best team members that I've met, they have really limited dental experience, but they were, a great culture fit. They were super coachable. Meanwhile, I've seen, extremely experienced team members with these impressive resumes create really massive culture problems. So that's one mistake that I see a lot. The other mistake is hiring out of desperation. We need someone yesterday. This person doesn't quite feel like the right fit, but they're here and we need a body in that seat. So again, kind of when I think about our most successful offices, they're hiring based on attitude. Does this person have a positive outlook? Are they growth minded? Do they want to grow? Are they coachable? Open to feedback? Have they been coached before? Accountable? Have they, shown ownership of something? Are they a good culture fit? Do they align based on the practice's core values? Because, people can learn things, right? Skills can be taught, but attitude, mindset, values are much, much harder to teach. So, really leaning into that and being patient, I think, is something that can help practices avoid making those two mistakes, being open minded and being patient. Maybe they don't have that resume that is as beefy as the other person, but they are in alignment with all the other things. And, maybe it takes us another week to find the person that we go, hey, this person is the right person. But that, week delay, if it's the right person, is totally worth it. And it saves a lot of headache later.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a team at the end of the day. And we've seen even in sports teams, right? If you have that one star, that they can create a lot of problems in the locker room when everyone is not on the same page working towards the same goal together.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Let's talk about onboarding after we've gotten the right team in place. What does a great first 90 days of a new employee being hired look like?
A good onboarding looks like there's a structured plan. I see so often that a lot of practices have like, what I would call like maybe an orientation. So it might be like a day to a couple of days or worse. A lot of times it's like trial by fire, but having a structured onboarding that would include like an onboarding checklist, a written document, that's got priorities that are based on that person's role, a 90-day development plan with built-in like touch points for performance reviews, weekly check-ins, touch base with them, those, especially in those first 30 days, every single week, what went well for you this week? Where do you need our support? Making sure that there's clear, success metrics that they're able to evaluate how they're doing too, and that they have a mentor. A lot of times that's going to dictate whether or not that person is, has that clarity, is feeling like they're making progress. They know where they stand, and there's that ongoing feedback loop. So there's no surprises. It doesn't feel like ever anybody's coming to them, with critical, correction. It's like there's an open line of communication. Hey, what's going well for you? Where can we, where do you need more support from us? What can we do to help make sure that you're set up for success?
Yeah, it helps the new hire feel welcome and, like you said, supported and appreciated instead of like, you're here, you do your job, you work for us, and that's the deal.
Yeah, yeah. I mean those first 30, 60, 90 days, that's really the time, and that's really what determines whether or not that person feels like they belong and whether or not they feel like they can be successful. So, a few days just isn't enough time. Our most successful practices, they do not rush this. They've got a structured plan, and even after that 90 days, they don't stop developing their people, right? They create ongoing opportunities to continue to develop and contribute into those team members too.
Absolutely brilliant. If only everywhere in the world worked that way. All right, let's talk about those top performers that either already are existing or they are developed. A lot of owners think that retention and retaining those top performers is all about compensation. Do you agree with that? And what does keep those top performers engaged?
I disagree. I do not think it's compensation. It's okay. Let me back up. So, compensation is, hey, listen, it matters. It attracts people, but it's not what keeps them. When I talk to team members and when I go into offices that have great retention with their team, they have people that have been there for 5 years, 10 years, 15 plus years. They rarely talk about their pay. They talk more about, feeling valued. Do they like receive praise and appreciation when it's due? What I would call like a safe space, like a trusting leadership. I mean, expectations are high, accountability is there, but they know that leadership has their best interest at heart and they truly want them to succeed. So, I hear them talk about all of those things, and I see in teams that stay for a long time those, that part of being in a great culture takes priority, much more over the compensation. I mean, again, compensation is important, it matters, but it's not the end all be all in getting people to stay.
You want it to be a happy, supportive, just kind of warm place where, everyone is willing each other to succeed and create a good experience for the people that they're serving, their patients.
Yeah, I mean, they're like you said, they're spending, I mean, you spend more time together than you do anywhere else. So, to be able to walk in every morning and know that you've got that support.
Yeah, no one wants to dread going to work. So
Oh.
that culture is so important. Jaclyn, what's one practice transformation that you've seen where investing in people dramatically changed the business?
I think that, there's a couple of offices I can think of where they really were convinced that they had a people problem. There was constant turnover, morale was really low, and like numbers weren't there, they were super inconsistent. So, the doctor was convinced that they needed better people. They needed to find better people. But, after spending some time in the office, it became obvious pretty quickly that the issue wasn't the people, it was clarity. Nobody had clarity. Nobody knew expectations. Nobody had goals. Nobody was being coached and developed. And the doctor was frustrated because the team wasn't taking ownership, but the team was frustrated because they didn't really understand or know what ownership looked like. So once we were able to identify some of those disconnects, everything really changed. So, yes, they invested in, developing their leaders, but they also invested in their team and really trained the team how to communicate better, how to, hold each other accountable in a healthy way, how to, present treatment more confidently, how to understand how to impact the practice and really create success within the practice. And that's when things really started to change. That's where they started paying attention to the right things. They started, measuring what mattered. And probably, I think it was about 18 months until I went back again. Their turnover virtually disappeared. They had their best month ever for collections, new patients, case acceptance, referrals. You name it, just about everything was up. That was incredible to see. But more incredible than that was to see that, those team members were thinking like the business owner. They were looking for solutions. They, were holding each other and themselves accountable. They were coming to the table with, really again, with like solutions versus problems. So huge 180 for sure.
I love that. You mentioned several really important ways that practices can improve from, getting new patients in the door to accepting more treatment. But what's one simple audit that every listener could perform this week to measure the health of their team?
I think, starting with themselves. So asking themselves, does everyone in the practice have clearly defined expectations? Do they know and do they have a metric that they own? Have I had one-on-one conversation with every person on the team in the last 30 days? Would my team describe culture the same way that I would? So, starting with yourself, any of those questions that have a no answer, that's a huge opportunity. And then, having the team actually rate the practice from 1 to 10 in a lot of different areas, trust, communication, accountability, clarity, development, training. Anything that they rate an 8 or lower, deserves attention. I think the key is it can be really overwhelming, if you try and tackle everything at once, but don't try and fix everything at once. Just pick one thing, pick one thing to hone in on and to really focus on for the next 90 days and then move to the next. And before you know it, again, small change can make a huge impact.
You mentioned focusing on just one thing. What's one investment that in human capital that can consistently pay for itself over the life of a practice?
I'd say leadership development every single time. Leadership is kind of the multiplier. Team development go hand in hand with leadership development. So, great leaders really create the environment, set the stage, but great training gives people the skills and the confidence to perform within that environment. So, our highest performing, kind of most successful practices really do invest in both of those things.
Fantastic. All right, last question, Jaclyn. If listeners remember only one thing from our conversation today, what should it be?
The biggest competitive advantage is not technology, it's not equipment, it's not marketing, it's not your location, it's people. So, a high performing team that trusts each other, that communicates well, that executes consistently is gold. So, that really is the secret sauce.
I love it. Thank you so much, Jaclyn. A ton of brilliant takeaways from today's conversation. I know our listeners got a lot out of it. And one thing specifically that stands out from today's conversation for me is that great teams do not happen by accident. The practices that grow sustainably are the ones that intentionally invest in their people. They develop leaders, they create accountability, and they build systems that allow everyone to succeed. If today's episode made you think differently about your practice, we'd encourage you to take one action item this week. Have an honest conversation with your team. Evaluate your hiring and onboarding process, or identify one investment that you can make in developing your people. And if you found value in this discussion, share this episode with another practice owner who could benefit from it. We will see you next time on the Private Practice Playbook.